Today in the Texas Tribune Weekend Insider. It's official. Rick Perry has ended his race for the GOP presidential nomination. Smith and Emily Ramshaw talk about the reasons why he called it quits. And although he's had strong finishes in both Iowa and New Hampshire, Ron Paul still can't seem to break through to establishment Republicans. Ross Ramsey talks about Paul's appeal and his chances of winning the nomination.
I think the overarching sentiment here is that Perry doesn't like to lose, and it became increasingly obvious that he didn't have a shot. Polling numbers yesterday made it look like he was going to come in fifth in South Carolina, where he was spending all of his money and his energy after skipping New Hampshire altogether. I think Perry looked at the field, looked at the pressure from social conservatives who are seeking to consolidate behind a single candidate, looked at the numbers and said, there's no way I'm going to make this happen. Better to just pull out now and do some of these other candidates a favor, maybe sort of restore some of my reputation with social conservatives by saying, there's no way I can win this. Let me help somebody else.
Part of what we're dealing with at the end of this campaign is the realization that this guy is human, because honestly, we haven't seen that up to this point. It's not that surprising that he got out when you look at how the campaign had collapsed.
The Perry campaign will tell you sort of quietly that the reason this didn't work out is because they started too late. They got into the race when all the other candidates had already been campaigning, in some cases for up to a year or more. I think the reality is that they jumped into this race and really weren't prepared, and it showed, especially when they started getting into the debate setting. I would say that Perry really never recovered from a string of pretty awful debate performances, the notorious oops moment, and I think it just sort of crippled his campaign. He leapt to the top of the polls immediately after announcing his run. He was up to almost 30%. Within weeks, he was down almost into single digits. So the reality is he just wasn't ready for this game, and I think it shows.
It was actually fairly selfless, if hyper-realistic, of Perry to get out, because now it allows him to look like a hero to conservatives if he throws his support as he has behind Gingrich. Gingrich somehow topples Romney. People will say it was Perry who pushed him over.
It's interesting to me that Ron Paul is doing so well and getting so little attention on some level. That this guy could finish second or third, as he has in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's had finishes that any of the other not Romneys would love to have. John Huntsman would love to have finished second in New Hampshire. And nobody's paying any attention to him. You sort of get the feeling that he could finish first in one of these things, and the headline would be, Romney finishes second and so finishes third. And it's because Paul has this history of doing well to a point and then kind of topping out. And the question with Ron Paul isn't, whether his supporters are intense. They clearly are. Whether his backers will fund him. They clearly will. He has a steady stream of money coming in. But whether Ron Paul can actually sort of break through and go from a very popular niche candidate to a mainstream candidate. We can see that Ron Paul is not going to change. Ron Paul is Ron Paul is Ron Paul, and that's kind of his appeal. The question here is whether the Republican mainstream has moved or will move far enough to put someone like Ron Paul in the majority. One narrative of this race is it's Romney versus the not Romneys. And I would argue that it's probably Romney versus the not Romneys versus Ron Paul. And I think that when we get to the point when, as it looks today, I'm not predicting the future, but if things go as they're going today and Romney's the nominee, right up until the moment when the Republican Party says that one, I think Ron Paul's going to be in the race.